I would now like to call to the stage Phil Glendenning. He is the current President of the Refugee Council of Australia and Director of the Edmund Rice Centre. He is one of the co-founders of Australia's for Native Title and Reconciliation, and for 10 years was National President. Phil is a fantastic campaigner for human rights and peace with justice. Phil, are you there?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming out on an inclement day, because something this important is not going to be stopped by the weather. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we are gathering today on the land of the Gadigal people of the Greater Eora Nation. And if ever there were a people who actually did have a problem with those who came to Australia by boat, it was the Gadigal people of the Greater Eora Nation. And sadly, the treatment towards our First Peoples is now being meted out, who are the last to arrive. In this nation of boat people, all of us are boat people. Whether we came yesterday or you came on the first boatload of unauthorised arrivals in 1788, we are all boat people. So what are we afraid of? Mr. Morrison, what is it that you're afraid of? Are we afraid of ourselves, perhaps? Because it seems to me, when we talk about those who come to this country to seek asylum and protection, as people have done over the past 225 years, these people that we lock away and refer to as these people are us. No different to you and to me. And I'd like to begin this afternoon with a poem that was given to me yesterday morning. It was written by an asylum seeker who did not attach a name to this poem. He attached a number, his boat arrival ID. And he says, "I do not know what will happen after I die. I do not want to know. But I would like the potter to make a whistle from the clay of my throat. May this whistle fall into the hands of a naughty child, and the child to blow hard on the whistle continuously, with the suppressed and silent air of his lungs, and disrupt the sleep of those who seem dead to my cries." And it is our role today to start again, to send a message to that asylum seeker and to all the other asylum seekers that we have detained across this land, that we are not dead to their cries. We are not dead to their cries. And often it's a cry that is met with poetry like that, or by the poor man Jonathan who died, who's committed attempted suicide, and we hope may not die, but the picture's looking very grim, whose despair was such that he swallowed half a bucket of petrol and tipped the rest over his body and set alight to himself. And he sent a message to say that he found the Australian people to be kind, but that he was not believed. He was not believed. Again, it brings our attention to the fact that this impacts most heavily upon children. And as we stand here today, there's approximately 1,000 people in closed detention, children, minors, in detention centres in this country and in Papua New Guinea, Nauru and on Christmas Island. And that is a great eternal shame. When a nation sees that it is appropriate to incarcerate innocent children as if they were the architects and authors of their own fate, we have hit a very grim moment in our history. We have hit a moment when we, the people, have to say, if the politicians aren't up to it, we will have to be. And the bit that's been missing in all of this is that the ethical consideration that Sir Robert Menzies, the father of the Liberal Party, signed us up to in 1954 when we joined the Refugee Convention. And we said we had legal obligations to people who seek protection, we had moral obligations to people who seek protection, and we had practical obligations to people who seek protection, and it was not to punish them. It was to afford them protection. And yet today we stand here and we have sent 1,200 people back to Sri Lanka without hearing their cases under what we call the process of enhanced screening, which the United Nations has condemned as returning people to torture. And from the Edmund Rice Centre, we know that 9 of the people who were sent back to Sri Lanka under the Howard government were killed when they went back. This must not happen again. Since October, those that we've sent back, we know some of them are currently in a cell in Colombo, 8 metres by 10 metres, and there are 72 men in there, and they get out for an hour a day. The crime was to seek to escape from that appalling post-war violence that besets Sri Lanka. That just last week we saw the United Nations High Commission for Human Rights launch an investigation with the sponsorship, would you believe, the United States, of the Europeans, strong support of the British. 3 countries have refused to participate and cooperate. Who are they? China, Iran, and Australia. And I see before me a delegation of Iranians here attesting to the fact that the regime in Iran has a viable opposition, and that opposition is not recognised by one country on the planet who has kept them on the terrorist list, and that country is Australia. So what are we doing supporting regimes like Sri Lanka and supporting regimes like Iran? And a lot of this is hidden from the Australian people. The secrecy that has surrounded this whole agenda, the secrecy that says the Australian people are not being told the things they need to know, while at the same time the government leaks or puts on its website the names of 10,000 asylum seekers in detention to provide their identity details to those who they're seeking to flee from and expose their families at home to danger. So on the one hand, we have a government that keeps secret from the Australian people the things that need to be made public, and makes public the things that need to be kept confidential. And yet at the same time we know there are clear alternatives available. At the moment as we stand here, Australia spends more than $4 billion on our processes of mandatory detention. Last year in 2013, at a height of heightened displacement of people around the globe, the United Nations spent $3.3 billion. We spend $1 billion more than the UN does in looking after 46 million refugees worldwide and 11 million in camps. We spend $1 billion more than that to lock up a few thousand. Nauru and Manus cost $1.2 billion to run. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees only has $103 million to spend in all of Southeast Asia. And yet our government and our opposition, both sides, still have a policy that says you must get in a boat and come to Australia before we're prepared to do anything. So let's not believe for a second that this policy is about preventing deaths at sea. If it was, we would do something to help people before they make that choice. We don't. We wait for them to come. The policy is not about preventing deaths at sea, it's about saying, die somewhere else. Now, there's a great Irish poet, Seamus Heaney, who sadly passed away a month ago, and he said, you know, sometimes it's difficult for us to hope on this side of the grave. But he said, if you look at history, there are moments in the times of peoples and nations when the great tide of justice rolls up, fires up, and hope and history rhyme. We are not there now, but we will be. And we will know that day, maybe 30 years from now, 20 years, let's hope it's sooner, when a Prime Minister of this country will rise in our national parliament and will offer an apology to the asylum seekers, the refugees, their families, and especially the children for the damage that's been done to them today in our name. And it's a day we have to work for. Now, right across the country today, we have people meeting in their towns, their villages and their cities who are refusing to be silent. And as Martin Luther King once famously said, we cannot be silent on issues of justice and human rights because silence is betrayal. Silence is complicity. Way back in the 14th century, St. Catherine of Siena said, it's the silence that kills. The government want to keep all of this stuff secret. But we're here today to say we will not let you do that. We are here to say is that we will not be silent from one end of the country to the other. From Perth to Cooktown, despite the rain, we refuse to bend on human rights. And if we don't have politicians that are up to it, it's our job to let the Australian people know the truth. So on this Palm Sunday, let us join together. Let's call out our poets, our singers, our songwriters, our artists to tell the truth of this in as many languages as we can find to the Australian people. There can be no peace without justice. If Australia is to become a truly great nation, we must learn the lessons of our history and not repeat them. The journey starts again today, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do it together and let's bury these days of shame on the scrap heap of history and embrace the future that the asylum seekers and the refugees tell us they can believe it's possible. It's up to us to do the rest. Thank you for coming out.